A woman collapses in the middle of the night, and her son is instantly labeled a monster by the neighbors who filmed instead of helped. At the center of it all, Choi Kwang-il, who mistook surveillance for safety and turned panic into public blame. But one nurse, haunted by her own silence, uncovers the truth hidden in bruises, footage, and a heartbeat that never gave up. And wait until you hear the twist that shattered every assumption, because justice, this time, didn't shout, it endured. At exactly 00, Kim Minji paused in the middle of brushing her hair. The tiny clock on her microwave blinked silently as a dull thud echoed from the ceiling above her, once, then twice. Then came a third noise that sounded sharper, heavier, like something falling or maybe being dropped. She stood completely still, toothbrush in hand, heart hesitating in her chest. Then a breath, not her own. A rasping, irregular inhale, faint but strained, the kind that wrapped itself in panic and pain. It was followed by something shattering, porcelain perhaps, or glass, a dish. And then she heard a voice, low, steady, counting. Hana, Dul, Set. 1, 2, 3. It wasn't yelling, it wasn't pleading, but it was controlled, rhythmic, desperate, not loud. Like someone trying to keep themselves from slipping or trying to keep someone else alive. Minji's fingers curled tightly around her phone. She had heard this kind of breath before, not long ago. That night. The night her younger sister stopped breathing in their old apartment. The same building, just 2 floors down. That memory had never truly left her. The silence afterward, the guilt of being too late, too uncertain. That's why she hated quiet moments like this. Because quiet didn't always mean peace. Sometimes quiet meant someone had stopped moving. Her apartment on the 3rd floor was directly beneath 502. She'd never spoken to the tenants above, only knew a man lived there. Quiet, rarely seen, never attended tenant meetings. Rumors floated, as they always did. Game developer, maybe a recluse, maybe odd. But now something was wrong. The ceiling groaned again, and Minji couldn't sit still. She grabbed her keys and bolted out the door without even putting on proper shoes. The cool tile of the stairwell bit into her feet, but she barely noticed as she took the stairs 2 at a time. Her pulse raced louder than her footsteps. On the 5th floor landing, the lights flickered. The hallway, usually so sterile and quiet, now buzzed with tension. She reached apartment 502 and knocked hard, once, then again, louder. No answer. She banged harder. "Hello?" she called out, breathless. "Is someone hurt?" At first, nothing. Then the door creaked open, just a crack. Yoon Tae-min stood there, hunched in the frame, like he didn't belong to the room behind him. His skin was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused, lips slightly parted. He looked like someone who had run miles without moving an inch. Dark ink stained his fingers. His t-shirt was wrinkled. The smell of anxiety hung in the air between them. "Not now," he whispered, voice low but urgent. He didn't sound angry. He sounded terrified. But Minji saw it, over his shoulder. The hallway light was enough. An older woman, maybe in her 60s, was lying on the floor just beyond his reach. Her hair was splayed over one side of her face, her arm twisted awkwardly. A bowl shattered near her hand. Pieces of white porcelain glinted on the wooden floor. Surrounded by scattered pills or rice, Minji couldn't tell. She couldn't tell if the woman was moving either. She took a sharp breath in. "Is she?" Tae-min didn't answer. He glanced behind him as if torn between staying and fleeing. His hand trembled as he tried to shut the door again. But he wasn't fast enough. Doors began to open along the hallway. Slippers shuffled. Curious neighbors, some still in pajamas, peered out, drawn by the noise. Among them was Choi Kwang-il, the homeowners association chair, a man whose sense of control over the building was matched only by his distrust of anything unusual,
especially noise, especially from tenants he hadn't vetted himself. He stepped forward like a courtroom judge entering the chamber, tall, always in ironed houseclothes, with a phone already in hand. "I heard everything," Guang-il said, in a voice far too loud for the hallway. "I told you we'd have a situation with that one." He lifted his phone toward the open doorway like a flashlight, filming as he walked. Evidence, just in case he tries to deny it. "Please," Minji said sharply, "someone's hurt, don't record." But he already was. Min didn't even flinch. His eyes were locked on the woman on the floor. His lips moved again, quietly, though she couldn't hear the words. Minji turned back to the hallway, fumbled with her phone, and with trembling fingers dialed 112. Her voice cracked as she spoke to the operator, trying to explain everything she wasn't sure she'd seen. Name, building, unit number, possible emergency, unconscious woman. No, not certain. Yes, someone needs help, now. Behind her, Guang-il continued narrating to no one in particular. "Violence. It always starts like this. I've seen this before." Minji gritted her teeth. The corridor was no longer a place of neighbors. It had become a stage. And while she stood in the spotlight clutching her phone, a woman lay still just beyond the doorway, and a man was counting softly into the dark.
The blue and red lights arrived in silence first, painting the hallway walls in pulsing waves like a slow siren without sound. Then came the footsteps, fast, practiced, and precise. 2 police officers and a pair of paramedics stepped out of the elevator with the clipped body language of people who'd seen far worse than whatever this apartment building in Mapo could throw at them. But when the door to Unit 502 opened wider, even their expressions shifted. A slight pause, a brief hesitation, like their breath caught for half a second. On the floor, Yoon Jang-suk lay completely still. Her gray cardigan had bunched at her side. Her blouse was darkened in the center, stained not with something alarming at first glance, but discolored in a way that warned of deeper damage. Her chest rose faintly, then didn't, then did again. Her ribs shifted unnaturally under the force of compressions, a sound like clicking porcelain echoing in the room. Bruises, faint but forming, began to reveal themselves along her sternum and side. Yoon Taemin's hands were pressed flat over her chest, slick with something red. His breathing was shallow, frantic. His arms shook with the effort of the compressions, but he didn't stop. "Hana, Dul, Set," he muttered through clenched teeth, still counting. The officers exchanged a quick look. One stepped forward and gently pushed Taemin aside to let the paramedics in. Taemin stumbled backward and leaned into the wall, eyes locked on his mother as a defibrillator was pulled from the medical bag. It should have been a moment of urgency, of help. Instead, it became a moment of confusion, because the neighbors had filled the hallway like water flooding a trench, and none of them understood what they were looking at. Whispers passed like sparks through dry grass. "She's covered in bruises. His hands are shaking. Look at them. He didn't even want to let anyone in at first. I always thought he was strange. Now we know why." The crowd wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Their presence spoke volumes. Minji stood at the edge of the group, her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to say something, anything, but what? That she wasn't sure what she'd seen? That it didn't look right but also didn't feel wrong? That panic and guilt can wear the same face as aggression? No one was listening, not really. Especially not Choi Ara. Holding her phone just below eye level, she filmed with practiced precision, narrating softly. "It's 12:27. This is happening right now in our building. An elderly woman, injured, possibly worse. The man who lives here, yes, he opened the door with blood on his hands." She sounded scared, her voice trembled, but her hand didn't. Taemin, still trying to catch his breath, looked up and saw the phone pointed at him. He shouted, not at her, not even at the crowd, but toward the paramedics. "Do you have an AED? Now! She needs it! She needs it!" But the sound came out wrong. Too loud, too cracked, too angry.
The neighbor stepped back slightly, as if his plea for help had been a threat. To them, he was no longer a son trying to save his mother. He was a man with blood on his hands, raising his voice in the middle of the night. The paramedics worked quickly. Pads placed, gel applied, compression switched. The machine beeped, and Minji heard one word that chilled her: flatline. The doors of the apartment remained wide open. The entire hallway had become a theater. And the audience wasn't just watching, they were making up the ending as they went. Gwangil stood in the center of the corridor, arms crossed, lips drawn into a tight line. His phone had stopped recording, but his judgment hadn't. He shook his head once, just enough for those near him to see. "I warned the building about letting just anyone in," he said softly. "She never should have been living with him alone." No one responded out loud, but they didn't disagree. Minutes passed, heavy and thick. When the paramedics lifted Jung-suk onto the stretcher, her limbs hung loosely, and a tube had been inserted to assist her breathing. An IV dripped beside her. She was alive, but barely. Tai-min tried to follow them, but one of the officers held him back for questioning. His lips moved quickly, explaining something about compressions, how long she had been unresponsive, how the bowl shattered when he ran for water. His words were fast, scattered, desperate. But the neighbors didn't hear his voice. They had already heard enough. Minji stepped aside as the stretcher rolled past. The hallway, moments ago packed with people, now felt narrower, tighter, like the walls were holding their breath. Then the paramedics disappeared into the elevator, taking Jung-suk with them. And the silence returned. Not peace, not resolution, just silence. But now it wasn't the silence of the night. It was the silence that comes after accusation. The kind that hums just beneath the flicker of phone still lit in trembling hands. A quiet made not of absence, but of judgment. And that quiet would be far louder than any cry for help.
By 2:30 a.m., the neighborhood had already decided what happened. The group chats were glowing, not with concern, but with certainty. Unit 502, woman collapsed, police called, blood on his hands, be careful everyone. He's been odd for months, never greets anyone, looks unstable. Thank goodness for Mr. Choi. If he hadn't acted quickly, who knows how far it would have gone. He raised his voice at the paramedics. That's not normal behavior. There were no official updates yet, no confirmed reports. But truth, in that moment, didn't matter nearly as much as belief. Tai-min had become a symbol, a target, a villain. And the building wanted a story to hold on to, something simple, clear, and aligned with their fears. It was easier to believe that a stranger had done something awful than to sit with uncertainty. In apartment 301, Minji sat alone in the dark. The only light came from her phone screen, but she wasn't scrolling. She was staring at the blank display like it might reveal something she'd missed. Her tea had gone cold. The steam had long stopped rising. But the noise, not the literal sound, but the memory of it, kept replaying in her head like a looped recording. Thud, breath, Hana, Dul, Set, the crack of porcelain, her own knocking, the blood, the silence. She remembered Tai-min's face at the door, not aggressive, but hollowed out by fear. She remembered the way he didn't try to defend himself, only tried to keep pressing on his mother's chest. And she remembered how Gwang-il stepped forward like a prosecutor, phone in hand, camera pointed. That memory made her stomach twist, because somewhere in the middle of it, she had hesitated. She, who had been trained in emergencies, who had taken an oath to act quickly, who had lost someone once already because no one acted fast enough. And yet she froze. Her fear had been real, but now it felt like shame. It hardened into something bitter, not just at herself, but at the hallway, at the people who watched and whispered, at the girl who filmed, at the man who stood with his arms folded and called it vigilance. Down in the lobby, the mood was strangely formal, like a press conference without an audience. Yoon Tai-min sat hunched on the edge of a waiting bench, flanked by two officers who spoke in low tones.
His hands were scrubbed clean now, but red marks remained around his wrists from tension or pressure. His back was slightly curved, his knees bounced. Every few seconds, his eyes darted to the glass doors, as if expecting someone or something to come back through them. The officers asked questions. He answered them all, calm, clear, without argument. But no one had to raise their voice. He already looked like someone who had lost the argument before it began. Across the lobby, Choi Kwang-il stood near the security desk, arms crossed behind his back, delivering what sounded like a practiced lecture. "Zero tolerance," he said firmly to anyone who would listen, which at this hour included only the security guard and a tenant in slippers sipping canned coffee. He wasn't shouting. He never shouted. He believed that policy, routine, and image kept communities safe. This wasn't personal for him. He wasn't being cruel. In fact, if asked, he would have insisted he was doing the right thing. He had once spent 3 million won soundproofing his own unit after a disagreement with a loud neighbor, a case that went unresolved for months. After that, he swore no incident in this building would be ignored again. He truly believed that shame was faster than justice, that once people knew someone was watching, they'd behave better. It was, in his eyes, a service. Minji stood near the wall of the lobby, arms crossed tightly, watching the scene unfold. Eventually, one of the officers approached her. She gave her witness statement, short and precise. Her tone was clipped. Her sentences were neutral. She didn't say anything she couldn't prove. But when she finished signing, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. Tai Min was looking at her, not with accusation, not even with hope, just a flicker of something softer, not quite asking for forgiveness. It was something harder to name. He looked like a man asking for time, time to explain, time to breathe, to be seen as something more than the worst version of himself. Minji couldn't hold the gaze. She looked away, the muscles in her jaw tightening. Heat rose to her cheeks, not from guilt, not even from shame, but from the terrible knowledge that no one here wanted the truth just yet. They wanted certainty. They wanted a name to attach to the night. And they already had one. Yon Tai Min. Outside, the air was still. The city never fully slept, but for one strange hour, everything had gone quiet. And in the building they all shared, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, people finally put their phones down. But the story, once told, didn't go to sleep. It lingered, unfinished, unverified, but believed.
At 0812, the hospital smelled like what most early mornings in emergency care smell like: disinfectant, paper, coffee left too long in the pot, and a layer of fatigue too heavy to wash out with soap. Kim Minji sat at the nurse's terminal with a clipboard balanced on her lap, but she wasn't charting. She was reading. Again. For the third time, maybe fourth, she went over Yoon Jung-suk's intake notes, line by line, as if the truth were hiding between the words. Sudden collapse, ventricular fibrillation, multiple rib fractures, sternal tenderness, bilateral bruising, anterior chest wall, markings consistent with manual resuscitative efforts. That word, consistent, stood out more than all the rest. It was a quiet word, neutral, cold, but in this case it rang like a small bell in her mind. Minji leaned back in her chair. Consistent with CPR. The bruising, the fractures, the positioning. She'd studied it during training. She'd done it herself in simulations, and once, only once, in a real code situation. Chest compressions done properly often broke ribs, especially in elderly patients. Bruising wasn't an error. It was evidence of effort. The price of trying to keep someone here just a little longer. Suddenly, she thought of Tae Min's hands, covered in blood. She remembered how the neighbors had frozen at the sight. But now, sitting here in the quiet hum of the emergency ward, she saw something different. Small lacerations, not jagged toots, not defensive marks, likely from broken porcelain or hurried movement, not a struggle. Her breath caught. She went back to the intake form. Fingertip abrasions on patient's sternum.
chest compressions initiated by family member prior to EMS arrival. Her chest tightened. In a nearby bay, behind a curtain, she could hear the subtle rhythm of machines keeping someone stable. Soft beeps, slow breaths, the fragile kind that only come after something terrible has been survived, if barely. It was Jung-suk. She was still alive. Unconscious, yes, but alive. Minjing rose from her chair and walked toward the break area. She didn't need coffee. She needed confirmation. In the corridor outside the ER, she ran into Lee Han-nul, a paramedic she'd worked with on a few chaotic shifts. He was washing his hands at the wall sink, gloves tossed neatly into the bin. "Long night," he muttered. Minji nodded. "You were on the call from Mapo." He glanced at her, cautious. "Yeah, 5th floor, right? Was it as bad as they said?" Han-nul dried his hands, then leaned on the counter with a thoughtful frown. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, "Bad? No. Intense, yeah. But the guy, her son, he was doing compressions when we arrived, hadn't stopped once. I mean, that literally." He looked at her now, expression softening. "The elevator stalled. We lost like 3 minutes. But the building security camera caught him writing it down, counting out compressions the whole way. I watched the video from the ambulance console." Minji felt something in her stomach drop. She hadn't known about the elevator. Han-nul continued, voice gentler now. He was panicked, but he wasn't out of control. He was trying to keep her breathing, and he was doing it right. Those words, "he was doing it right," struck harder than expected. Later that morning, Minji stood inside the security office of the apartment complex, staring at a screen. She'd requested the footage through official protocol, citing her hospital badge and the need for clarity. Ironically, it had already been downloaded by Choi Gwang-il himself, who had demanded a copy the night before. "For the record," he had said, in case the police needed more evidence. Minji clicked through the video, time-stamped at 0021. The elevator doors opened on the 5th floor. Tae-min rushed in, mother in his arms, breathless. The camera showed everything, no sound, but every movement mattered. He pressed the emergency button with his elbow, never letting go of her chest. He shifted her gently onto the floor right there inside the elevator. Then, hand over hand, he continued compressions. Hana, dul, set, over and over and over. Minji didn't need sound to hear him now. She had heard him already, at midnight, when everyone else had hesitated, when she had hesitated. Something shifted in her chest, a slow, careful swing of emotion, like a compass needle returning to true north after spinning for too long. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't fear either. It was something harder to name. Maybe it was clarity. Or maybe it was the bitter realization that the truth had always been there, buried under people's need for certainty, for blame, for stories that made them feel protected from chaos. The chaos had come, and the one person who didn't flinch was the one everyone rushed to condemn. Minji shut the screen and stepped out of the room. The hallway outside was quiet. Sunlight had started to pour through the windows near the stairwell, warming the cold tile floors. The building was waking up, coffee brewing behind doors, children gathering backpacks, slippers moving across floors. And none of them knew yet that the story they believed so fiercely a few hours ago was already beginning to unravel. Minji took a deep breath, fingers tightening slightly at her side. She had seen enough. Now it was time to speak.
By 9:30 a.m., the worst had passed. Yoon Jung-suk had a pulse. Shallow, assisted, fragile, but it was there. The ventilator hissed with slow mechanical rhythm, a sound more hopeful than harsh. Each breath was borrowed, but alive nonetheless. In the emergency wing, nurses moved with steady hands, doctors adjusted medication levels, and a chart was updated to reflect the one line that mattered most that morning. Status stabilized. Across town, in the police substation, Yoon Tae-min sat in a small interview room, quiet, exhausted, but finally not restrained. A plainclothes officer returned his phone. Another handed back a sealed envelope with his personal items, and one offered what could barely be called an apology. "We regret the confusion," the officer said, avoiding eye contact. "Thank you for your cooperation." Tai Min didn't speak. He simply stood, nodded once, and left without ceremony. There was nothing to say. The damage had already been done. Outside, the city carried on. Buses hummed past sidewalks. School children crossed intersections, half asleep and laughing. Bakeries opened their doors to the scent of dough and cinnamon. The world moved forward, not knowing how close one apartment building had come to cementing a lie. Back at the complex, the lobby had returned to its usual morning rhythm. Deliveries stacked at the front desk, security yawning behind the counter, and elevator doors sliding open and shut like nothing had happened. But Kim Minji was waiting. She stood near the mailboxes, arms folded, watching the door, with a calm that came from clarity, not anger. In her hands were two printouts, one from the hospital, one from the time-stamped lobby footage, and behind her eyes was the weight of everything she now knew. When Choi Kwang-il entered from the stairwell, still dressed in his neat cardigan and pressed slacks, he paused mid-step upon seeing her. Not because he was afraid, but because something in her expression said, "You need to hear this." He approached slowly. "Miss Kim," he began, voice neutral, polite, unsure. Minji didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply spoke. Carefully, quietly. So every word would land exactly where it needed to. "Those bruises," she said, "they're from CPR, not from anything else. The rib fractures too. And the blood on his hands? From the broken bowl. He cut himself getting water." Kwang-il shifted, saying nothing. She continued, "Your footage, the one you were proud of posting, slowed everything down. People hesitated. They watched instead of helping, because they thought the video proved something." Still, Kwang-il didn't interrupt. But the lines around his eyes deepened, like someone slowly realizing the shape of a mistake not meant, but made. Minji's voice remained steady. His counting? It wasn't rage. It was compression rhythm. He was trying to keep his mother alive, all night, while the rest of us were making conclusions. Kwang-il's expression changed, not to shock or guilt exactly, but to something more difficult. A kind of internal collapse, not of status, but of certainty. He had not acted out of cruelty. He had acted out of conviction, the kind that makes people confident, loud, unshakable. And that kind of belief, when proved wrong, leaves behind a bitter taste. He swallowed, but still didn't speak. Minji didn't wait for him to. She turned and walked away. Later that day, she sat at her desk and reopened the viral post on Choi Ara's social feed. The clip, 38 seconds long, had spread across the building and beyond. It showed shadows, chaos, tension. It invited assumptions without context. Minji didn't ask for it to be deleted. She simply posted a comment underneath. A quiet correction. Timestamp 0021. Counting equals CPR rhythm. Bruising, manual compressions. Video review confirmed by EMS. He never stopped trying to save her. Noise at midnight can be violence, but sometimes it's someone refusing to give up. No hashtags, no accusations. Just truth, placed softly where people had been loud. That evening, for the first time in days, Unit 502 opened its door to something unexpected. Not criticism, but porridge. Warm bowls of rice gruel, quiet knocks. Neighbors came, one by one, with soft apologies and awkward bows. Some didn't speak at all. They just left the food at the door. A few added handwritten notes with gentle words.
Hope she recovers quickly. Sorry for the misunderstanding. Let us know if you need anything. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. Minji returned from her shift around 7 p.m. She approached the door to 502 and gently slid a folded note through the crack before she could second-guess it. It read, "I'm sorry I looked away." She turned to leave, but before she reached the stairwell, the door opened behind her. Yun Tai-min stood there. He looked as if he hadn't slept in a century. His eyes were swollen, skin pale, voice gone. But he stood upright, holding the paper in his hand. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He nodded once, and that was enough. No forgiveness, no dramatic reconciliation. Just a truce between two people who had lived through the same night and come out changed. Weeks later, the building voted to fund AED training for all residents. New guidelines were quietly distributed, typed in plain language, and posted near the elevators. In emergencies, help first. Never film. Never assume. It wasn't just a policy shift. It was a cultural one. And while the scars of that night would never fully vanish, not from Tai-min, not from Jong-suk, and not from the building itself, something softer began to settle in their place. Responsibility, awareness, and a quieter kind of justice. One that didn't shout, one that didn't go viral, but one that stayed. Because in a city where walls are thin and lives bleed into one another, sometimes the most powerful truth is this: we don't always get to rewrite the past, but we can change what we do next. And that morning, the morning after the noise, that change had already begun.